fantastic overview of the evil empire and their tactics, and they are evil. They contribute to tens of millions of premature deaths. What else do we have some names for that? Well, the whole panel come up. Those were really very succinct presentations, and we're opening the discussion up for questions, comments to all the morning presentations. So maybe we'll start right off with the panel members first. If anyone wants to comment or question one of your colleagues' presentations. Rick.
Can I start? So, Steve, I'm curious. One of the most impressive biological effects that you can see in people is the water intake, total water intake, is strikingly constant. And so if people are going to reduce their consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, they're going to drink something else. And in your model, do you assume that water is free because it comes out of a tap, or do you build in a cost for buying bottles of water, and how does that influence the cost-benefit here of the taxation?
Well, it doesn't really play into, I mean, people spend a lot of money on different foods and beverages, but they can make a lot of different choices. We've studied water consumption a lot, but actually it doesn't really affect the cost-effectiveness results at all.
If the companies that make bottled water were to increase the price of bottled water, then the incentive would be reduced to switch, right?
Yeah, but the water market's very competitive, like everything else. Like we could talk about this a lot. For me, the most striking thing about bottled water is that poor kids drink more bottled water than wealthier kids in the U.S. What we have is a crisis of public water supplies in the U.S. We've underfunded them. A lot of kids don't have access to good water. In Boston here, more than half of the public schools don't have a working drinking fountain. It's part of the lead crisis. It's a problem throughout the United States, particularly in older cities. So water is a problem that we can work on, but it's not going to affect the cost-effectiveness modeling here.
Any other panel questions, comments? Okay, we'll open it up to the mics.
Yeah, question for Steve. In your model of the effects of the tax on SSBs, you estimated the reach at 311 million. Is that in the U.S.?
Oh, it's basically everybody older than the age of 2 because we didn't model the first couple of years of life. But clearly, a chunk of those people are not consuming sugary beverages, but still, they shop in stores, and so they're subject to seeing the tax. But we're not assuming that everybody's purchasing. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I guess sort of. I was just shocked. I guess I was just shocked, and maybe I'm naive about, because that's like 96% of the U.S. population. So I'm wondering if that's why I'm asking. It seemed high to me, but in terms of modeling the impact of the tax on,
right.
I assumed you would have limited
some
it
of those
to
people, a chunk of the older adults don't consume any, and we take all that into account. But they still go into stores and they see prices of different products, so they're subject to the tax. They're part of, that's the way we just frame it. Yeah.
Right. One other quick question for Dr. Ellerup about the effects. You presented a lot of data on saccharin, effects of saccharin on the microbiome. Have you studied other artificial sweeteners, particularly the stevia, like rabinicide?
In the preliminary set of experiments, we've tested both aspartame and sucralose in their commercial formulation on mice. And then we turned on to saccharin, as I've shown you. However, we've since then tested the effects of aspartame and sucralose on the microbiome by sequencing the microbiome, and found that both, as expected, induce changes in the microbiome, which are distinct from the ones we observed for saccharin. We still don't know the mechanism and the meaning of these. In the ongoing human-based prospective trial that I mentioned at the end of my talk, we're testing all three of them in moderate to low amounts in humans, so time will tell.
But not stevia or
not stevia
rabinicide.
so far, yeah.
Sarah, I'm not sure very many people here know why the industry was able to get preemption passed in California. Do you know the background of the story, why they were able to do that? I think it should be, if you don't know, I'll tell, because I think it's very...
You should ask a Californian. Go ahead.
Right. Basically, it's been described as a blackmail technique. They got a ballot initiative passed, meaning paid to get enough signatures collected, that would allow voters to vote on whether they want to forbid passage of any taxes at the local levels that did not receive a 2/3 majority. And that was interpreted as preventing the passage of any local tax whatsoever, the kind of money that was needed to generate salaries for the fire department, the police stations, and so forth. And the legislators, the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor felt their hands were tied, that they could not allow this law to go in front of the voters, that it would pass. And so the soda industry offered a deal saying, we'll pull it if you prohibit any grocery taxes at the state, local level, at the local county levels for the next 12 years. And this is all explained in an article by Anna Had O'Connor in the New York Times on June 28th, so you can get the details from that article.
Can I ask, Sarah, do you want to say anything? Oh, can I ask you, is there any plan to move around this or
It took
in
them
California?
absolutely by shock. My son, who actually works at the state capitol, said there is now already talk about, okay, in 1 year we repeal this law and make them do it all over again, and they have to then spend another $8 million to go through this, collect another million signatures. But at the same time, it did expose a real problem in the ballot initiative system. There is nothing at this point stopping any industry to say, oh, let's do that and get this passed. Basically hold the legislator blackmail.
And I would just add to that one effect of this sort of preemption is it could really take the wind out of the sails of any future public health efforts. The other effect is that it could really energize public health to do a better job and to try to either, to your point, get it repealed or do something as like a workaround, maybe even get a state tax passed, which is highly unlikely. And I think that just as the sugar industry has become more sophisticated from tobacco and the gun lobby, so too has the public health industry gotten much more sophisticated because taxes are passing more frequently. And even with fewer resources, I think public health has gotten better at harnessing those resources and trying to use them effectively. So my sense is that there's a lot of frustration and people were taken by surprise, exactly to your point, but there's a lot of energy and focus on trying to make more progressive policy in California around beverage taxes despite this.
Yeah. According to Laura Schmidt at UC San Francisco, there is a list of 26 states in which they plan to use the exact same tactic. Yeah. I don't know how true that is, but...
Steve.
Yeah, just as a point of interest, a lot of states already have home rule laws, like Massachusetts and New York State, where you really, local municipalities just can't on their own pass a beverage tax like this, and that's really tended to limit what's happened, I think, in Massachusetts and New York. That's why Mayor Bloomberg went for a different type of regulation there and not for a sugary beverage tax. So there already are in place lots of limitations on what municipalities can do in many states.
Yes.
I would also, again, like to congratulate all the speakers for fantastic talks today. Thank you. To Iran, I just had a question for you. So when you diet, there's a whole pattern response that fights against the diet in the sense is that, your energy expenditure goes down, and, so these are all very old evolutionary responses to starvation and stuff. So the question is, on the microbiome, what is known when people diet on the microbiome in general, never mind the beverage issue, but is there a change in the pattern of the microbiome so that it thinks the body's starving and it harvests more energy? And what do we know about the microbiome in dieting, and what could we do about it?
Yeah, excellent question. Actually, the rebirth of the microbiome field in 2006 was marked mainly on studies that focus on either the effects of weight gain or dieting on the microbiome, which are quite pronounced and in many ways reproducible. Now, what we've discovered in our own work, published a couple of years ago, is related to a pattern of obesity and dieting that I'm sure you all are better aware of than me, which is yo-yo dieting or recurrent obesity, which, as you know, is the major pattern of obesity worldwide. And if we kind of are starting to scrape the surface in understanding the molecular pathogenesis of obesity, we know nothing about what drives this exaggerated weight regain pattern that is so common. And what we've found, which was very surprising, is that following a successful dieting, the only parameter that we found out of hundreds of parameters that we measured after a successful dieting that remained disturbed was the gut microbiome composition and function. And what we found was that this kind of conferred a memory of the microbes to previous bouts of obesity, which predisposed to an exaggerated weight regain upon the re-exposure to obesogenic conditions. And we even found that a specific set of metabolites missing in this memory microbiome configuration was driving the effect through transcriptomic effects on adipocytes. So there seems to be a very peculiar impact of the microbiome on different aspects of obesity and dieting at different phases, which we're just starting to understand.
Fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your hard work, especially in some of the uphill battles that you're fighting, especially in policy. Dr. Ilanov, I wanted to ask you about the effects of sugar on the gut. Your lab had actually very elegantly showed that high glucose concentrations can disrupt the tight junctions in the intestinal cells, and that may be mediated through GLUT2. And I'm curious, whether or not ingestion of large amounts of added sugar, do you think that on the lumen side of the gut, in the GI tract, could that also have a direct effect on the intestinal barrier function?
Yes, so as you said, in our published work, we mainly focused on systemic hyperglycemia, and basically we're able to explain the phenotype commonly observed in obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and cardiometabolic disease, in which the gut barrier function is disrupted, leading to a pro-inflammatory state and an infection propensity. Now, related to luminal glucose impacts, we haven't published anything on that, but we have recently kind of tested this in a few preliminary experiments in mice, and we haven't found a consistent and a robust impact on gut barrier function so far in our hands when we administer the sucrose or glucose orally as compared to the systemic induction of hyperglycemia in the published work.